you've got everybody alive, and the bank, the Santander Bank data, analyzing the appropriate patient who would benefit from the COMPASS trial. Well, you've gone a long way. And really, we have in the chat box, we have several questions which have been asked. And some of these questions are unfortunately not really directed to the COMPASS patient, because some of these questions are largely to do with rivaroxaban. So I would just initiate one discussion on, because this is a clarification which has been sought in the chat box. And why was a dose of 2.5 twice a day chosen in the COMPASS trial and not the standard antithrombotic dose or 20 or 15 milligrams a day? And why is the dosing twice a day and not just once a day? So maybe Dr. Dalal would like to answer that, or maybe Tiny. Yeah.
Well, for one thing, if you use a very standard dose of rivaroxaban, like 20 milligrams, and then you add aspirin to that, the incidence of bleeding increases considerably. In fact, I would like to really warn everybody that it is not wise to use a full dose rivaroxaban and aspirin, and except in the certain situations, it should not be used. Even the guidelines show that even in multivessel PCI, after 1 year, you should drop the aspirin and only continue full dose Novax. So clearly, the combination of full dose rivaroxaban and aspirin is not advisable. Now, the question of why they use 2.5 milligrams, they did try other doses. They did try 5 milligrams, and they ran through various, and they found that the 2.5 milligrams was the optimal vascular dose, which had the benefit without too much excessive bleeding. So that was a dose they actually worked out. It wasn't something they took out of the hat and said, okay, now we'll use 2.5. The question is, why did we use it twice a day? Because whenever you reduce the dose of any drugs, the first small dose will not have a 24-hour effect. So if you were to use 5 milligrams only instead of 20 milligrams, 20 milligram rivaroxaban will act even at the end of 24 hours. A small dose like 5 milligrams once a day would not have a 24-hour action. And therefore, whenever the dose becomes small, you have to spread it out and give 1 dose in the morning and 1 dose in the evening in order to have a full 24-hour correction. So I suppose I've answered all the
3 brilliantly. That was very well explained, because this is a question which residents ask in the round. This is a question which everybody wants to know. So very clearly, the pharmacodynamics of 20 milligrams of rivaroxaban or 15 milligrams of rivaroxaban is different from 2.5, and when the dose becomes less than 5 milligrams, you need to give it twice a day. So this is a point which is just been alluded to by Dr. Dalal. Would Tiny like to add something? Tiny normally knows a lot of things. I recollect so many interesting talks given by Tiny where he digs out things like the Santander Bank, which is the basis of the PISA trial, was actually quite brilliant. So Dr. Dalal actually made a point that stable angina, stable heart failure, there's nothing stable about them. There's nothing stable about stable angina. And when we actually look at it, a stable angina can become unstable at any time. The second point which Dr. Dalal made, which is reinforced by Tiny, is that even if you have stable subset and you have polyvascular disease, you do have a significant residual risk. And we know that for the last so many years, a lot of science and a lot of pharma industry has been trying to figure out how to deal with this very significant residual risk. And we tried lots of things. We tried to intensify statins. We added ezetimibe. We added Vascepa. We added now PCSK9 inhibition, inclisiran. These are all the lipid-lowering strategies. We have better anti-diabetics like SGLT2 inhibitors or GLP-1 receptor analogs, which are actually maybe prevent the GLP-1 receptor analogs may help in preventing atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. And we also have the anti-inflammatory. I mean, we have this group, the Paul Ridker, Peter Libby group, which actually deals with very expensive drugs like canakinumab, methotrexate, and now colchicine, cheaper substitutes like colchicine are knocking on the door, which are trying to come in through, or what Tiny showed beautifully as the presence of FDG PET having inflammation in various vascular systems. So, and we also have this graph which has been alluded to by both the speakers about the relative advantages of using these combination therapies. But I'm going to really ask you all to be astrologers and predict the future. What is it that we are going to do to reduce residual risk? Are we going to have anti-inflammatory function? Are we going to just go for everybody with aggressive lipid lowering? Or do you think a dual pathway inhibition is going to be adequate for getting to adequate lowering of residual risk? So I'll first have Jimmy's take on it, and then I'll request Tiny from some tongue-in-cheek here.
I think if you really want to benefit the patient to maximum, and we are talking of these serious patients with polyvascular disease, difficult to treat coronary artery disease, or those who've already had multiple events and multiple procedures already. So clearly we have a high subset of patients. In those group of patients, number one, I would definitely try and bring their LDL to as low as possible, even if I need PCSK9, and bring the LDL down to 30, because I think there's clear evidence that there is benefit of bringing LDL down. Obviously, I would control the blood pressure, I would control the sugars, there's no question about that. But I think in this subset of patients, I would definitely seriously consider using rivaroxaban. I'm not sure whether there will be a trial in the future combining rivaroxaban with clopidogrel, and would that reduce the bleeding compared to rivaroxaban with aspirin? Because we know from NOAC trials and from the WAS trial with warfarin and aspirin that when you drop the aspirin and use clopidogrel with a NOAC, the bleeding seems to be less than when it is combined with aspirin. So it is possible, and the Gemini trial did clearly show that even if you use a P2Y instead of aspirin, the bleeding doesn't really become more when you combine it. So I think that may be one of the things in the future, but we don't have a trial. So right now I would do in these sort of subsets is to bring their LDL down to 30, continue with a small dose of aspirin, and add a 2.5 milligrams twice a day of rivaroxaban. So that's the way I would treat it. And of course, controlling the sugar and blood pressure as much as possible.
Tiny, your take on this?
No, absolutely. No. Absolutely agree to Professor Dalal.
So great. Tiny actually referred to a very brilliant data, which was, I think, just a few months ago came in circulation, which was actually landmark analysis of the COMPASS data, which actually showed that largely the bleeds which happened in the COMPASS trial were GI bleeds. And as Dr. Dalal pointed out, they were non-critically serious, non-vital areas. So they were not really intracranial bleeds. And in the landmark analysis, the maximum bleeds which probably happened in the first 12 months. Thereafter, it remained stable, or it actually decreased. Right? Whereas the benefit actually incrementally grew and was rather stable. So it grew year by year. And the second thing is that since most of the bleeds were GI, so I think that's where the point about aspirin possibly having a little higher GI bleed issue may also be something as a food for thought, because that's something which we can consider as being important. Now I'm going to ask both of you a very, very provocative question. We have all discussed the ideal patient, which we have learned from the COMPASS trial, person who is where the sweet spot of using rivaroxaban and aspirin actually is best suited with minimum disadvantage. Well, what are the patients that you would not include? Because for any therapy, I was explaining to Kamal Pava just before the talk, and I was telling him we have to protect a therapy, because if we allow inappropriate use of a therapy, then it will come into disuse or it will fall into bad ways. So what are the patients that you would not use the COMPASS trial dose of rivaroxaban 2.5 twice a day with low dose aspirin? Tiny, sir.
Yeah, see, first thing would be that, like you said, I think it's very important that in all these webinars, we insist that the listener goes home knowing that where he should not write a drug, right? He goes home and writes rivaroxaban 2.5 for every patient he sees, and they all come with bleeds. That is waste of resources. So I think a person who is stable, let's say, on a single antiplatelet, had a single vessel disease, you had stented and low risk. Basically, all those we have said are not there. A person doesn't have a polyvascular disease, a person who had a single vessel disease and you had taken care of that, a person whose lipids are well controlled, person who has not a huge burden of risk factors, not a diabetic, okay, he never had a CVA or a peripheral vascular disease. Why are you thinking of adding? Obviously, we will not add at all. That is one side. And the second side is that clearly understand that this is a vascular protective dose. It has nothing to do with AFib. So your next AFib patient, don't think that, oh, Indians always do good with small dose and go on writing 2.5 milligrams. Because today we see so many AFib patients come on dabigatran 75 milligrams. One company manufactures that, right? Or somebody who is coming with 2.5 milligram apixaban and OD. But they're not doing any good and they are increasing chance of bleeding. So I think both sides are there. There are two limbs of that MACE reduction and bleeding. One is increase in bleed and one is the ischemic event. We should find the sweet spot. We should not deviate onto the right, giving a therapy for a person who doesn't need it. And at the same time, we should not deny a person a therapy that he would benefit with.
So great. Really, yeah, Dr. Dalal wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think we should look at the patients who are more likely to bleed. And I think that bleeding tendency we look at for all patients, whether we are using dual antiplatelets or this dual therapy. So in my mind, I think this has been very clearly shown who are the patients who are likely to bleed. So one is the elderly, particularly those above the age of 80. We could say in our country 75, but clearly I think 75 is still young. And I think above 80, there would be an increased chance of bleeding, and usually 80 is the cutoff in most of the trials. Number two, patients who are anemic. Number three, patients who got CKD, which is significant because they bleed more. And most importantly, patients who already had a bleed. Because if you had a bleed, there's the greatest chance of you bleeding again. So if you have a patient where you are doubtful whether the benefit will be there or not, and if they fall into any of these categories, then maybe you would hesitate to use. But if the patient is young, there is no significant CKD, there is no past bleeding, and there is no anemia, then I think the chances of bleeding will be less, and you should safely use this drug if it is indicated. I would like to point out that we somehow feel that these patients who we need to give rivaroxaban are very few, we hardly see them, but that's not true. You just look at them. Anybody with peripheral artery disease, with coronary artery disease, previous two events. I mean, if I look at my practice, yeah, maybe we are highly specialized cardiologists. Almost everybody seems to fall in this group. I rarely see a patient who comes to me for the infarct for the first time. That goes somewhere else. They come to me after they've had 2 infarcts, then some bypass, another plasty after that, and then of course diabetes and hypertension and creatinine a little bit. So we see these patients so commonly that it's not at that rare. And I think for us to use this 2.5 to improve their future mortality, morbidity, I think is a great step forward in the treatment of these patients.
Absolutely. And I think you put it very, very succinctly. And I think, but there are a few points which are coming from the environment, and these are in the chat box. For example, the traditional utilization of NOACs, which till now were for things like atrial fibrillation, for stroke prevention, and also venous thrombosis, pulmonary embolism. So that they are completely different cup of tea here. So the environment should be clear that we are not confusing and we don't want to get there. But a very significant portion of our patient population is those who've undergone PCI. And we all know the value of really using aggressive antiplatelet therapy in these patients who've undergone PCI stenting and this is to prevent stent thrombosis. We also know that in these patients, there is significant residual thrombin generation post-PCI. It's not that a PCI is a singular event without any thrombin generation. But this particular group, despite its having a recurrence rate which is well validated, which is rather finite, it is not that it is a non-existent recurrence rate, has not been taken as part of the COMPASS trial. Maybe the Gemini ACS addressed it, and since Tiny referred to the Gemini ACS, maybe I'd request Tiny, well, what is your take on these patients? Dr. Dalal did point out for the first 1 year, you'll follow the standard rules post-PCI, but I want you to give in clear-cut terms, how does the COMPASS trial deal with these kind of, or this possibility of using 2.5 BD deal with these kind of patients?
No, I think there is no one word answer for that. But if we look into the development of therapies, if we look into the, for example, the Twilight data, Pegasus and Twilight tried after 3 months, ticagrelor alone versus ticagrelor plus aspirin, and ticagrelor alone was good enough. In fact, it reduces bleeding further, both complex and Twilight diabetic, right? So which means we are talking about today the minimum period of time in dual antiplatelet, and then migrate on to single antiplatelet on one side. And at the same time, we very clearly understand that whatever antiplatelet combo we give, 1, 2, different, whatever, we are not addressing thrombin. And thrombin is a truly big problem, right? So there has to be a vascular dose coming in, but at what exact timeline post ACS we should start that, I think today that should be an individual decision. So if you stop at 3, see, we today know the decision as to how long the dual antiplatelet goes depends on whether the patient has a high ischemic risk or a high bleeding risk. And we decide on whether we are going to give for 1 month, 3 months, or 6 months, okay, or even extending on to 9 months. In fact, there are patients who we have done PCI years back, now come 6 years, 7 years later, they're still on clopidogrel aspirin, right? Combination going on eating that. And they never had a bleeding. They never also had an event rate. But these are not the large number we are talking about. We have understood that our false sense of complacence that, okay, they're doing well, are not right. So I think a time has come when we should start thinking, okay, after 9 months, a patient whom we are considering stable, for sure, we should, instead of continuing dual antiplatelets, we should add rivaroxaban in those patients who have high risk, like we have very clearly pointed out, multivessel disease, polyvascular disease, diabetic, a host of risk factors coming in, and such stuff. A patient who is absolutely fine, low risk, probably he's a person whom at 9 months or 6 months, we can stop the dual antiplatelet and go on for a single antiplatelet as aspirin as of now, right? Now, should we take the Atlas ACS as a line and start thinking as to early adding rivaroxaban small dose vascular? Yes, it is time to think, especially for that very high risk patient. For that very high risk patient who had multiple events, multiple interventions done, and who is on a dual antiplatelet, there is now, I think this time is right when we should start thinking of adding a third drug early, but we should make sure that this patient is not bleeding prone. We should look at his body weight, we should look into his age, we should look into whether his GFR is abnormal and whether he is going to bleed high. So if the ischemic risk is high and the bleeding risk is low, my option would be to add earlier and earlier, as early as 3 months perhaps.
Dr. Dalal, your take on this? It's a controversial, it's a controversial and a very personalized kind of thing at this point in time, because we don't even have a network meta-analysis to support it. I was trying to arrange a network meta-analysis for all this, but it was too confusing, and all the mathematicians and statisticians failed me. So, so your take on this, Dr. Dalal?
My take would be that there's a lot of data to suggest that in patients with PCI, you could drop the aspirin after the first 3 months and then continue only with ticagrelor up to the end of 1 year. The problem in my mind is, what do we do after 1 year in these patients? After 1 year, you have 3 choices. You could continue aspirin, you could continue clopidogrel, not continue, but restart clopidogrel, or you could continue ticagrelor in the dose of 60 milligrams twice a day. And my feeling is that since you've already done ticagrelor for 3 months to 12 months, you might as well continue with ticagrelor 60 milligrams twice a day instead of 90. So that's what I would do in a patient who has got significant coronary artery problems. Now, if a patient is very simple, a patient has a single stent, patient is young, is non-diabetic, does not have polyvascular disease, then I would simply continue with one single antiplatelet therapy beyond 1 year. If the patient has got complex coronary artery stenting, like a left main bifurcation or multiple stents, then I would personally prefer to continue 2 antiplatelets after 12 months, and I would continue aspirin and 60 milligrams twice a day of ticagrelor for these patients. And you have a third subset of patients which do not have complex stenting, that means no left main bifurcation, but who got stents and who got diabetes and who got polyvascular disease or a history of stroke or a peripheral vascular disease. These are the group of patients I would continue with aspirin and rivaroxaban. So that's my thinking about what I would do after 12 months. So there will still be a group of patients where I would continue aspirin and ticagrelor, especially those with left main bifurcation, where I do not want any stent thrombosis because that would lead to death. But in the patients who don't have such complex stenting, but who got polyvascular disease, I would shift them to aspirin and rivaroxaban small dose.
Great. I think that's with that we've actually had a very good clarification of when to use this combination, the Compass combination of rivaroxaban and or 2.5 twice a day and an aspirin. We suggested to all the companies that they should rename the drug because it should become a little easier for everybody to prescribe it, because it's not the same dose as and not the same indication as what requires 15 and 20 milligrams, but nobody appears to have taken our advice seriously. So I think with that, we are also coming to the end of our allotted time slot. And maybe one final comment from both our erudite speakers who've done a great job this evening. May I request Dr. Tiny, if you can start off, what is your message to everybody? How should they take this evening lessons forward?
Now,
Just
I think
inform you, there are more than 3,000 doctors online, and everybody is very interestingly listening to you, sir.
Oh, thank you. See, my take home would be just two. Number one, the new concept of dual pathway inhibition has come to stay. There are a group of patients in our clinical practice in whom a single or dual antiplatelet is not enough. And we need to add antithrombotic therapy by vascular dose of rivaroxaban small dose to the therapy. That is one. So the new concept of dual pathway inhibition, like Professor Dalal said, there are a lot of patients who actually are indicated, but we miss them out, number one. Second important concept point is the concept of polyvascular disease. As physicians, we often tend to restrict ourselves to our own specialty, and we would just look at cardiology, neurology, peripheral vascular, diabetic, vasculopathies, and all that. We miss out those huge burden of polyvascular disease, especially when they have very minimal symptoms. And these are patients who have an extremely high risk by all the registries. So I think if we have two main points to learn, one is DPI concept, and one is the concept of high risk of polyvascular disease.
Dr. Dalal?
Yeah, a couple of points I would like to make. First, I think that we have done an extremely poor job on peripheral vascular disease. I think we should take back peripheral vascular disease, which is today going to vascular surgeons, interventional radiologists, etc., who of course do a great job mechanically, but of course they require help in terms of medical therapy, which I think we have let them take over, which I think we need to take back the medical therapy of peripheral vascular disease. So that's number one. And second, of course, I always end any lecture by saying that the biggest problem is not the understanding of the subject, but the inertia of the doctor. Today, I see any number of patients who may have beautiful stenting with OCTs and IVUS studies, but who will be on a small dose of statins with their LDL cholesterol of 80 of 90, and the interventional cardiologist is quite happy with that. I see a number of patients with heart failure, repeatedly hospitalization, who may or may not be on ARNI, may or may not be on SGLT2, may or may not be on an MRA. And that's what really bothers me. Why do we have this inertia in spite of knowing so much and having the knowledge, but still not really bothering? And I think sometimes what happens is when we see a patient in the clinic, the patient says, how are you? We ask him, oh, I'm fine. Oh, you're fine. Okay, you're taking this, continue that. I think we have to stop that. And if we want to stop that, we must have a checklist for every patient. We go through checklist. While we have in the heart failure clinic, we have checklists. We make sure the patient was on every single drug. If the patient's not on the drug, why is the patient not on the drug? And similarly, we should have checklists for these patients with coronary artery disease and vascular disease. Why is the patient not on dual antiplatelets? Should he be? Should he be on rivaroxaban? Is even this patient's lipid down or not? Is his treatment of hypertension adequate or not? So I think we need to break down our inertia, be more aggressive, be more, think of our patient as something we have to do good to rather than just having seen them in the clinic. So let them not be fine, let them be much better, and let them live longer being fine. And I think that onus is up to us, which I think we are not doing.
I would request Medley to give every one of the participants a copy of Atul Gavande's book called Checklist, which he got from the airline industry. Yes. And you actually make these checklists, as Dr. Dalal very rightly pointed out, and so that we can actually implement appropriate therapy to our patients. Now, this is a growing field. We have learned that chronic stable angina is not really stable. It should be renamed as, that's why chronic coronary syndromes. Polyvascular atherosclerosis exists in all the beds. We have data from Egyptian mummies where CT scan, 3,000-year-old Egyptian mummies have been CT scanned, and you found evidence of calcium in all the vascular beds. And we had this beautiful demonstration which Tiny showed us about FDG PET showing inflammatory responses. And many of these triggered enzyme cascade systems are going to be cross-linked, whether it is the lipid pathway, whether it is the atherothrombotic pathway or the inflammatory pathway. We are going to finally come to somewhere understanding a common final pathway, but we are far from there. With what we have today, we have to exercise caution and understand the appropriate patient, which has been validated by such elaborate and extensive trialing as being suitable for a therapy. And if we find that patient, and these patients, as Dr. Dalal pointed out, are your and my patients, they are everyday patients who come to visit us in the clinic. Every day, if we just take a small diary and see how many patients did we see today who qualify according to the COMPASS trial data, we will find that we are in double digit almost every single day. And we need to also understand the patients in whom we should avoid its use to have adverse effects. So having said that, I think we have come to the end of a very, very fruitful discussion. I learned a lot, both from Dr. Dalal's and Tiny's brilliant talks, and I do hope it has benefited everybody. With this, I will hand the session back to, is it Kamal or Prashant who's going to take on?
Thank you very much, sir. I hope I am audible.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Dal. I am Prashant Thaparkar, Senior General Manager, VasoCare Division of Medley Pharma. At the outset, I thank each doctor, each clinician who participated in this Rivaten webinar and for taking your valuable time out. I take this opportunity to also thank Jamshed Dalal sir for the insight on the COMPASS trial and what is the exact role of rivaroxaban in the clinical practices. I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Tiny Nair also for the implication of a COMPASS trial in the clinical practices and the vascular dose of rivaroxaban. Thank you very much, sir. I thank Dr. Anil Dhal also for a wonderful moderation of the entire Rivaten webinar.